But God, in his sovereignty, decided to step in and help us anyways. Why would there be good when all we've earned and deserved is destruction? So the question is, why does God allow evil? We allowed evil. The question is, why does he step in with his goodness in spite of our evil? And so one thing I've noticed over the years as we get into regular life and doing things in church and in spirituality, and you get into your routine, you go through your daily stuff, it's easy to get hard. It's easy to get expectant. It's easy to just kind of go through the motions. And I get tired of that because there's no life in it. It feels good, maybe even just as a cycle that we repeat and we go on. But this one Psalm 51 verse 12, David says, "Restore to me the joy of your salvation and uphold me with a willing spirit." And going back to one of the things that most people become apostate because of is disappointment. It usually happens around 35 to 40. It seems to be the age when people's expectations, and if their life doesn't match up, they start questioning God. And I've started smelling and talking with a lot of people, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody because I have to check my own heart too. But you start smelling disappointment or bitterness towards God, where they're not actually even sure he's good. They're not sure he's who he says he is because of their expectations of him and him not meeting them. Remembering nobody had to make you cookies. There were no treats coming. Good people decided to make those treats. Now the treats stopped, you're mad. And so, let's see here. Setting that as the groundwork. Yeah, please do. Right. Yeah, that's the word. I won't repeat all that because you just have to be here if you want to get all the candy. But essentially, Dan was saying that if we don't know who he is, we won't understand how to function in this life, or how to process what goes on, because it comes down to trust, like a huge amount of it, because God never promised us that our circumstances were going to work out. But how? And I'm not even accusing anybody, because this just happens, man. It happens from we read scripture a certain way, we hear a message a certain way. We all of a sudden expect, oh wow, how come things aren't working out perfectly? How come my business isn't working out? How come these relationships aren't working out? How come this isn't? If God really cared, then how come, right? But I think it comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding of what he exactly came to do. He didn't come to fix your circumstances. He came to change you. And he's committed to changing you. And he is faithful to changing you. He is overwhelmingly interested in changing you. But here's the thing. When you change, your circumstances will change. And don't get me wrong, man. I love slapping hands on somebody and seeing pain go. I love the miracles. I love the phenomenal, the supernatural. Amazing. But so many of my own issues and so many of the things that are holding me back are because of the state of my own heart. Not necessarily because someone's being mean or my boss won't lay off me or my wife won't, whatever, right? It's like he said, take heart for I have overcome the world. In this life you will have trials, but take heart for I have overcome the world. And so that's telling me that it's like, oh, it doesn't mean, and you look at the early disciples and what happened to them, and you look at what happened for 300 years until Christianity became, whatever, a state religion. It was brutal slaughter, and I'm not saying it all had to happen, but they weren't apostatizing in the same way that we do today. Not that there weren't, there were. There's some examples of backsliders in Scripture. But they also were facing death daily, and I think the stakes were just different. But for guys like us, I don't want to become somebody who's entitled. I don't want to become expects God to show up in a certain way and then gets all mad when nothing happens. But I also want to balance that with the truth that he shows up for us. With the truth that he moves mountains. With the truth that he lays hands on the sick and the sick recover. That he changes financial situations. That he heals hearts. That he heals wounds. And these are promises and these are inheritance. This is inheritance from the King. This is what we get through Jesus Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. So, and maybe this is just stuff to ponder. I don't exactly have an answer. Well, I'll give you my answer in a bit. But I guess the conundrum or issue I would like to pose to all of us are, how do we effectively balance our expectations with the promises of God without becoming entitled and spoiled, and without giving up hope as if nothing can change? Because that's not biblical either. So I think you understand my premise of the spoiled, expectations of those who don't deserve cookies. We're never told that we're going to get cookies, expecting cookies, and then being disappointed when there aren't any, as a state of the natural carnal mind. And then entering the kingdom of God, where we inherit the kingdom of God, transformation in our own hearts, transformation in our circumstances, life, power, healing, all the things Jesus walked in. How do we avoid becoming hard? How do we avoid becoming bitter? And knowing God's a big part of that. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
You gonna go for Fred?
Yeah, I'm gonna
jump in right quick.
Jump in, get a chance here to. I liked what Dan said about learning who we are, learning the Word. But some people learn the Word and have doctorates in theology, but they don't know the author. So that's a day-to-day thing. And so we talked last night about evangelists that go and see thousands of people commit their lives or make a decision for Christ, but there's no follow-up. So then in some churches, they establish programs of discipleship and mentoring and marriage weekend, and now we're doing, the tabernacle, and now we're doing covenants, and they go through all of the stages, which is awesome. But it turns into, very often, the clergy versus the laity. And there's people still aren't involved in getting to know God. They're getting to know their instructor and his opinion. So I think it goes back again to our identity that we talked about last night. So when we know who we are, we got this salvation package. What are the benefits? The benefits is you shall receive persecution, as well as like you were saying, the healing and the power of God and the provision, kingdom finance. So it's a big picture. I also don't have the answer, except that it's not in a one-man show, and it's not in one season of our life. And it's, as I said last night, we are being saved. And those who endure to the end shall be saved.
Yeah. Like it. You're not going to grab a microphone or what?
I was waiting.
You're waiting. We're trying to be so much more polite tonight or this morning than we were last night.
I've got thoughts. So, I mean,
Of course we have thoughts. Look, at the end of the day, I think one of the greatest goals of Christianity has to be learning to be content in all circumstances. Right? Paul said, look, I've learned to be content in all circumstances. I've been rich, I've been poor. I mean, even the Ecclesiastes, like, everything is meaningless. This is all dust, guys. Yeah. Like, this time we have together, this is dust. This is ambassadorship. This is not where I'm living when the King comes back. I'm not living at Rock Lake Ministries. Like, and I'm sure not living in the current context of Rock Lake Ministries, where I have to worry about budgets and I got to worry about persecution and I got to worry about podcasts and electronics not working, and I won't have to worry about any of that in the New Jerusalem. Like, I won't have to worry about that in the New Kingdom. When the King comes back to take his bride, like, we're ambassadors right now. We're living in the kingdom concept now with a real king who's really with us, who's really governing over this, that's being reconciled to all this stuff, and this is not this, like, it says store up treasure in heaven, not treasure on earth. Like, I'm not trying to be the most popular guy down here. Like, I'm not trying to have the greatest, whatever. I don't know. I think we get stuck in, when you're talking about expectations, I think we get stuck in our false expectations of what we can actually expect in this life, or what we should even be expecting. If love is what's best for you at my expense, then I'm never disappointed. Because I understand that drawing the short stick is exactly what Jesus did. You want to follow me? Like, you don't even know what you're asking. I don't even have anywhere to lay my head, buddy. Like, you want to live with me? I'm living outside. I don't even have a tent, buddy. Like, are you sure you want to do this? Wasn't like, yeah, come live in the mansion right now. It was like, look, like, sure, but count the cost. Understand what this thing is. Understand who your God really is. Understand what actually makes his heart skip a beat. Like what is on his heart? Well, what the greatest thing he ever created was humans. And if you're gonna try and make a difference in the lives of humans, you better understand it's not gonna be easy.
Yeah, I'm going to try and piggyback on some of this great stuff already. The word tribulation has already come up, trials. Correct me if I'm wrong, Pastor, but tribulum is the word we're talking about here. And in Hebrew, that whole idea of a tribulum was to get the grain of wheat out. So there's a purpose behind these tests and trials. It wasn't God slapping us down. It wasn't the storm trying to drown us. There's a purpose and an intent with this tribulum. And that is how you get the good stuff out. So already there's some patterns I want you guys to focus on. Daniel was just saying that when we change, circumstances change. I want to add to that a little bit. What if the circumstances don't change? What if it's our perception of that circumstance that changes? We change. The storm becomes irrelevant because God's doing all the stuff in us. He's cracking that grain out. He's bringing all of this out. The storm, I don't care how big the storm is. I don't care how big our devil is. I know how big our God is. So when we start going down this quest of getting better, the opposite of that is getting bitter. Back to expectations, which is exactly what Daniel's been talking about. When we put an expectation on God, it's the same thing that happens when we put an expectation on others. Or worse, sometimes we put expectations on ourselves. I won't get edgy, but people know some of my heart around the word should. And what I want you guys to be thinking
You can
about.
get edgy. What are you talking about? Listen, I was fully aware of who I invited to sit here.
All right, so maybe I will. So we all need to stop shoulding on God and shoulding on ourselves. That word should carries tons of expectation. It's the way we think it should have happened. When we get let down, whether we are not understanding what God promised in his word, we don't understand our God and what he said he would do and what he wouldn't do, or whether it's someone else who lets us down or we let ourselves down, our addiction. I should have been able to say no. I shouldn't still be struggling with this after all these conferences. I should be able, stop. That's what we got to try and get away from, is this chronic sense of expectation.
What's the alternative then?
Okay, thank you. You're getting ahead of me. But so expectations turn into resentment. That is the one thing I've noticed after years of working with people. Resentment is always the outcome of expectations. How is it we can be loving God and still resent him? How can we love our wives and our girlfriends and still resent them because they let our expectations down? How can we say we believe in ourselves, we know God's anointed us, given us skills and talents, and yet we resent ourselves and struggle with chronic shame, thinking I am bad? Like there's a pattern here. So when we want to figure out an alternative to this, we need to start to figure out how can we adjust perception. Back to what's already been said, we need to know the heart of God. Knowledge isn't power, it's applying that knowledge. That's what we talked about yesterday. So just because we can know all these things, just because, let's say, some of you are taking notes and trying to take as much knowledge out of this weekend as possible, the knowledge itself is irrelevant. It's I shouldn't say irrelevant. It adds something, but it's very minimal in terms of power. Power comes through application. So how do we shift perception? How do we move from expectations to, let's say, goals? Expectations, I'm going to say fixed. This should happen in this way, by this time, with this person. And if any one of those boxes don't get ticked, I get ticked. So how do we waive the right to hang on to those expectations and instead pursue goals? So the way that I do this, and to answer Tyler's question, many of us, especially if we come from Mennonite background, are raised through a lens of judgment. Many of us know that word. We do not like the idea of judgment because we've been judged. And then we, in turn, subconsciously or consciously, judge others. We suck at being a judge, man. That is his job, not ours. So if we could give up that right to stop judging, or even its ugly twin sister, prejudge, which is where we get which is where we get prejudice. How many times do we prejudge situations? How many times do we prejudge relationships? We prejudge an event. This isn't going to work. I've been there. I've done that. I've done this before. You don't know that. We cannot carry yesterday's pain and then start painting all of our today and tomorrow circumstances based on yesterday. That would be a form of judgment. We wonder why we live with these expectations. It's because we haven't renewed our mind. We have to find a way to get away from the judge role and become detectives. So why was a question that was already brought up. We shouldn't question why. I'm almost going to agree with that. There is point to why, but it's usually not when we're soul searching and questioning God or in some kind of crisis.
In despair.
That's right. When we're in despair, why is not the answer we need. Why is frustrating. No, it'll give us excuses, it'll give us reasons, but it won't give us direction. What we need is a different set of questions. And the questions I use all the time is what and how. Those are the two questions I'd love for you guys to start pondering this weekend. What has God called me to do? Not why is this still happening? Why am I still struggling? Why is my things not being met? Why are my expectations? Why am I still shoulding? Why does my wife? Why does God? Why do my neighbor? Let's leave that here. Instead, let's go back to so what? And that's where I get a little sharp with people sometimes. They'll tell me these horrible stories, and I look them in the eyes and go, so what? And I mean that on purpose. I'm not trying to minimize the problem.
I really, really like him as a psychotherapist, just so you know. Like, I love that. It's like, and?
Exactly. It's the end. You told me something that you cannot control, and? Like, what are you going to do about it? This is my past. Congratulations. We all have one. These are my mistakes. Show me one person on this panel who hasn't made a mistake, guys. We
Probably
are not
Brad.
defined by those mistakes.
Probably Brad.
Probably
if
Brad.
any one of us is probably Brad.
Probably Brad. So that's what I'm challenging everybody to start thinking of is how do we be more like a detective? How do we ask the right questions? You guys will go through things, but things don't define you. You can get better or you can get bitter. And how we do that is by changing those questions. Get better. Find a way to question, what do I do? That so what turns into a now what. The now what unlocks how. That's what we're going to be looking for, is how do I take something out of here, go out there and shine and be the ambassador that God's called us to be.
I think that's a really good, obviously a really good stage upon which to stand to face those storms. And I think tying it back into something Brad said about identity and realizing that, hey, Carrie.
Carrie Shapansky is here.
Don't tell anybody.
Don't tell anybody.
But getting back to that whole identity thing where it's like, and then Troy, what you said too about the storm becomes relevant. Like, that sucks to hear when you're going through a horrible storm. That sucks. Hey man, the storms are relevant. But it's true. Yeah. It's true. And this is something I do when I talk to people and talk to myself is like, okay, this sucks. I have very little control over what's out here most of the time. I have 100% control over what I'm aware of right here. And you know what? I am going to pray. I'm going to say, God, I don't know what's going on here. I don't like this. Change my circumstances, please. But if that's not going to change, Lord, you're the same God in the fire, in the flood, in the storm, in the grassy fields, by rivers of water, you know, the valley of death, all the stuff. He's the same God. Jesus was the same person when he was having dinner with the boys and when he was marching the cross up to Golgotha. Whether it was a storm, whether he was having a good time, he manifested Jesus. And so what I've landed on and what I'm learning to apply more and more is, and it's not that I don't have hope, and it's not that I don't have expectations in God to come through and things, but it's also like, why am I such a victim all the time? Like, why does God need to come through for me or I'm going to die? Like, people have lived through crap for generations. And I'm not minimizing your pain or your issue or what you've gone through. But it's like, I need God to save me. Well, what if he did already? Like, he saved me. War in Ukraine, war in Israel, drug cartels in Mexico, crazy stuff, horrible things. Jesus isn't coming to do another thing. Like, he came to die on the cross. He came to put his spirit inside of you, right? So whatever you find yourself facing, whatever giant, whatever it is, even if this thing kills me, the victory of the gospel is not having this produce sin in here again. Not letting the circumstance produce sin inside of me. or plant its babies and I birth the chaos that I'm encountering, right? Because, like, how much, remembering facing this like we're in a war too, right? Like, you gotta love those movies where there's a hero or some captain and he gets captured, or he gets overcome by the enemy, and the enemy's stepping on his neck and he's like, submit, submit, submit. We'll take your house, we'll take your wife, we'll take your kids, we'll ruin everything, you will submit. And he's like, no. You're like, yeah. Nice. Not even unto death, I will not submit.
That sounds like a man movie.
That's like,
Yeah.
You can
yes.
take our lives, but you'll never take
Our
our
freedom, even if we die. Even if we die. And how, in Revelation, do the saints overcome? By the blood of the Lamb, word of their testimony, and the most uncomfortable one, not loving their own lives unto death.
Yeah.
And so, but that's not just like, okay, so go. Like, you actually have to have this as a perspective, that there are bigger, going back to what Tyler said too, this is dust. There are bigger, more important things. In my own little, and not that God doesn't care about the details, don't hear that. And real life is important. But there has to be a bigger picture that is filling up the background of everything that you're looking at. Jesus, it says in Scripture that for the joy set before him, he endured. So there was a background of joy to the cross. And he could see the background of joy, but he had to face the cross. Right? And he went for that thing. And that's the kind of God he is, and he didn't shy away from it. Even though he could have. He could have called in a legion of angels. And so one of the things I think is important for us to begin to do very practically is, and I said this yesterday, and this kind of ties it into the joy of our salvation as well. Because that's, who knows, who remembers that moment, man? And you got hit with the understanding that your sins are forgiven, that he loves you no matter what. I get emotional thinking about that.
He might even like you, Fewster.
He might even like you, right?
He might even like you. He
might
doesn't just
even
love
enjoy
you because he
being
has to.
around you.
He actually
might even
likes
have
you.
pleasure in who you are and your weirdness and your awkward tics. He may even get a kick out of that and have a blast hanging out. But getting back to that point, I think that has to be foundational, right? When David says, restore to me the joy of your salvation, it's like, I never want to get very far away from what he did on the cross for me. In my pursuit of healing, in my pursuit of kingdom finances, in my pursuit of relational health, in my pursuit of all these things, I never want to get too far away from or replace my foundation of he loved me and gave himself for me. One thing I ask people is, if all Jesus did was die and forgive your sins, and then you're on your own till you die, he would still be worthy of praise. He would still have the highest name. He would still have all power and authority and rule and be the only name willing to be worthy of praise. If that's all he did. And that's not all he did. But if that's all he did, would that be good enough?
He's already better than every other god out there. Like lower G God, right? Non-existent. He's already better just at that point. And you know, I think one of the themes I've been coming up against lots lately is this idea that everybody wants God to prove something. Like he's got anything left to prove. He proved everything he needed to do 2,000 years ago, and people have been talking about it ever since. He doesn't need to do a new thing all the time. Well, if God's really real, he needs to do something new now. And can I challenge a thought that you said about being in the storm? You said that when you pray for God to take you out of your circumstances. And one of the things I've been really challenging the students here on is, whatever. I didn't think that was your theology, right?
That is my final.
But I've been really challenging the students and myself to stop praying for God to take me out of anything. And I've been really, really honing in on God, take me through this. I wanna learn everything I can. Absolutely. I want to be strong enough to endure this. I don't want you to just whisk this away. To your point last night about
rapture me from it, right?
Man, I'm so tired of this idea that like maybe let's not get into the rapture. But I'm really tired of this idea that we're just waiting for, Jesus to appear and take away all our misery, when there's a job to do on the way there, and that job is to bring as many humans with us as possible. Like, the job of an ambassador is to represent. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Jump in.
Brad Brick.
So we are the only Jesus other people will see and know. So we are representing him. We are representing him. And our actions are seen. Sometimes our words are heard, but our actions are always seen. And I really, for me, a big takeaway already from, last night was awesome, and this morning, that Troy's should have. You should have known I was going fishing this morning and have my lunch ready. Or, honey, are these your underwear? You never put them in the hamper. Okay, first of all, should have, never, always, no, don't go there. Rather, or pastor never, or the worship team always gets that note wrong. And, okay, is there something I can do to help that? And if not, pray for them and work on me. Concentrate on being the best me I can be.
I mean, we have it up there, right there, from Pastor Dwayne, right? I manage me to influence you. I don't manage you, right? It's everything you're saying, Daniel, about there is a thing that we're supposed to be doing, right? And I guarantee you're not supposed to be building your own kingdom.
Yeah.
And if you're building up your wealth or your Facebook group or your celebrity status or whatever, if those things are for you, for your retirement, for your family, your nucleus, for your whatever, I'm confidently saying to you, you're missing it. It's supposed to be for something so much greater than you. And actually, it's supposed to be for the greater we. And I think the world is dying to find a community of people who actually take care of one another and die for one another. Not just a community of people who invites everybody else to die for them while they're not willing to reciprocate that. I really feel like, we live in community here 24/7. There's 30 of us that live 24/7. These are people who used to be in witchcraft and addictions and real people. This isn't just
Is it true you're going to change the name from Rock Lake Ministries to The Narrow Way?
I don't know, but I think that's a good idea. Maybe that's the name for the narrow way talk. I don't know. But I think it's really given me a different perspective as to what the original apostles did. You're under so much scrutiny in terms of a way of life and a bunch of different ways of life trying to come together and enjoy each other and not hate each other and not be offended. And how do we put into all these biblical practices when we're tired and you're sick and you're hurting and you're offended and you're yelling and this is real all of a sudden. More real than I think I really acknowledged. And the biggest thing I've realized in this season is I can't possibly, even though I'm a leader here, I can't control this thing.
Right.
I can't. So all I'm left with is healthy boundaries and influence. That's all I'm left with is I will set the example and I will invite you in to being a part of that example. That's all I've got. I don't have a dictatorship. And I don't think Jesus ever wanted that for anything. I think he invited us into a different reality check. And I think that's what we have to offer as believers is to be able to offer something different. Not to demand other people accept something different, but to really offer something different. But the only way you can do that is to learn a new way of life. Because if it looks like everybody else and it smells like everybody else, I'm going to question whether it's Jesus. Just saying. Jesus is a new way. He's the way. And we owe it to ourselves to look at that as ambassadors, especially any of us leaders, to be above reproach. And what does that mean even? You know, to really investigate, what does it mean, this kingdom lifestyle that we're supposed to live here on earth, to set a different example, to be set apart.
Daniel.
For me, oh, man. We'll give it to Brad.
Brad break.
I like that question. Daniel's asking, how do we take this stuff into our? I agree. It is much easier for me as a church leader, living in a bubble community of believers, much easier than when we leave the bubble. I like saying the bubble. When we leave the bubble, it's much harder to take it out of here. And like, my short answer is, it's the same thing we've been talking about. I got to learn to manage me better.
Yep.
I got to learn to be me. I got to learn what that even means. And I need to take that into every situation, every circumstances, whether it's green grass or a storm. But that requires a lot of intentional strength building, understanding of who I am, what fuels me, what drives me, what kills me. Say that again. Cultivate the fragrance. Yeah, I like that actually. We should like put that on a sign or something. Cultivate the fragrance. Sorry? Yeah, at Rock Lake. Well, whatever. I think we should do this everywhere. I mean, I even
Catch the whiff. Yeah.
the narrow way.
So I want to piggyback off of some of this as well that Daniel was bringing up. So how do we apply? How do we bring this home? I'm going to throw a big word at you guys. It's two words, actually. One of them is locus of control. What do you actually control? Control's been a word that's already been bounced around a couple times already. Expectations, resentment, usually as a result having no control. When I'm not in control of something, I typically react. I try to use my fear, the what if junk, to try to take control of an outcome. That doesn't work. I end up at resentment. Sometimes it's distrust. Maybe I don't trust God. I'm going to talk more about trust during my lecture, so I'm going to just leave that alone for right now. But we're going to come back to this idea of trust. What does it mean? And then the last one is worthlessness. It's that overdeveloped sense of self-awareness. I'm looking at me instead of looking at him. How did Peter sink? He was walking on water, man. He was doing the impossible, keeping his eyes on Christ until he noticed the wind and the waves. He got distracted. So what is in our locus of control? Self. So the one thing that we need to all be mindful of is, what has God called us to? And like the storm analogy that we've been talking about, if God leads you to it, he will take you through it. So we're not asking for a change in the storm. We're asking to be led. We're asking to develop a strength of character, to learn what we need to learn from those trivial moments in our life that's designed to crack the good stuff out. The other word that I want to leave with you guys is metamorphosis. Transformation. This is what we're all looking for. As leaders, this is what we look for in the people we serve, is transformation. I'm going to go way back, grade 4. Science class. Blackboard. Teacher comes in with an aquarium. I got that one wrong. It was a terrarium because there's no water in it. And in that terrarium, there's a bunch of leaves and caterpillars, and I'm watching this thing, and I'm bored. My ADHD was at unprecedented levels. I'm just waiting to get out to recess, and the teacher writes on the board, metamorphosis, total transformation. Fast forward. A couple weeks later, a bunch of spiders came along, or it looks like, and puked all over these things, and there's these gray sticky things. I called it a cocoon. Nope, I got that one wrong too. It's a chrysalis. Whatever. Fast forward. Finally, it happens. A couple weeks after that, in the middle of science class, these chrysalises start to shake. And we're watching, and we're waiting, and nothing's happening. And some well-intending girl, because they have more empathy than boys typically, they're like, "Teacher, it's stuck. Can we open this cocoon?" And do you know what happens if you open that cocoon in that moment?
It kills it.
Yes, it does kill it, and it's not for the reason we might think. The number one answer I get during this story is it wasn't ready. It's ready. It's fully formed. It is ready to embark on its life.
It hasn't gotten all the muscles strengthened through the fight of evolving
There it is.
into the world.
There it is. It needed that struggle. It needed that storm. It needed that tribulum to produce the only thing that it needed to fly. A freed butterfly is one of the saddest things you'll see. It basically, it doesn't have the shoulder strength to bear the weight of its body. So there's nothing wrong with the organism, but it dies because it can't fly, therefore can't eat, therefore dies. That's what sometimes our over-involvement, our rescuing each other. We try to take the storm away from one another. We try to open the cocoon for our brother. Sounds godly on the surface, but what if that cocoon was there by God's design? What if the cocoon each one of us are going through is there by God's design? He led you to it. He will lead you through it. And that is the catalyst that helps us become real stormtroopers. Not the Star Wars ones that can't hit anything, but a real stormtrooper. The guys from, if anybody saw the movie Passchendaele, like this is where the Canadian soldiers got their reputation as stormtroopers. No one else would do it, send in the Canadians. We'll go. Like that's just the way we think. So what if we could embody that here and be legit stormtroopers? Whatever storm you're going to go back into, take your courage. Find what you need to find this weekend and go into the storm, because if he led you to it, he will lead you through it.
That's a great example, and we see that scripturally with Christ too, where you ever look at, you study Israel and you study the life of Jesus, it's synonymous, right? It's the same story. So Israel goes into desert, but they follow flesh, they follow carnality, they let that lead the way. And even though they're watching pillars of fire or smoke every day, right? What's going on here is what's causing them problems. And so when they faced a trial, most of them had to die. Jesus goes into the same desert, fasts for 40 days, faces the same trial, the same temptation, but he comes out in power. So it's like we have these chrysalids. One chrysalid killed the organism, the other chrysalid formed it. And so it's going into your life with that idea that, man, and this goes even back to my story yesterday about, well, don't do hard things. Hard things are hard. You know, you're succeeding if things are easier. Your life should be, you know, that's winning. But it's like, that's not nature, man. That's not how God designed things. As soon as you stop putting resistance up, you start getting weak. You don't get to maintain. Once you hit the plateau, you're either growing or you're dying. And that's going to be it forever. From when you're a baby until you're 90, right? If you're not developing new ways of thinking, if you're not challenging, if you're not growing, if you're not moving your body, you will go backwards. And so I kind of wanted to tie this into how this plays out in your life. And I'm going to use finances as an example because it's edgy and relevant. So I read a book recently about finances, about kingdom finances, and we have all these promises in the Bible, and we have all this stuff about being prudent, and we have all this stuff about stewardship, and we have things about all that. And, you know, we've got crazy government stuff now. There's all these taxes. There's a lot of pressure on men to provide. Things are expensive. How come gas is so cheap in Winkler, by the way? $1.35? Are you kidding me? It's $1.52 in Niverville? Land of the free. Yeah, just amazing. You're $1.55? Yeah. That's unreal.
It's this little bubble. I don't know.
Anyways, what I started noticing is that Because when we have a money problem, we're like, okay, I need more of these numbers in my bank account, or I need to manage these numbers better, or I need to produce more of them, or I need to give some more of them. It's very practical. But this book I read, what I caught from it was this is far less about what I do with the money I have right now, and far more about who I am and who God is, like Dan was saying. So, God doesn't just have some rocks. Like God made the universe. We need rocks as minerals. And he's like, okay, here's some rocks. No, he has storehouses of rocks. He has mountains of rocks piled up that no one will ever use. It's like God's my rock guy, okay? If I need rocks, I'm going to go talk to God because he's got plenty of rocks. And he doesn't just have some water, enough for everybody to drink. There's the deep where we haven't even explored yet of water reserves. And it's not just because God has that stuff. That's a reflection of who he is. He stores up, he saves, he provides. So the question doesn't become, well, how much money do I have in my bank account? And I need to have a storehouse, and I need to have... No. Do I believe there's a future to save for? Do I want to be ready to give when the opportunity comes up? Do I want to be able to use my resources to take advantage of a circumstance and profit? Am I ready to strike financially? That comes down with what I believe, not about what I'm doing. And so there's some scriptures, and I've always read these wrong, and it produced guilt because it's like, well, I don't have that. But that's not the point. It's about how you view life. So Proverbs 19, verse 14. House and riches are the inheritance of fathers, and a prudent life is from the Lord. According to the Bible, fathers ought to be given their children houses and riches. Proverbs 13, verse 22. A good man leaves an inheritance to his grandchildren, but a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous. Like, I know I want to leave an inheritance for my grandkids. But when we read these things, we don't want to go, oh, well, I don't have much money. And do you know what somebody who believes this, how they view life? There's a future. There are other people who have needs who are beyond me. I'm going to produce and save for them. I am generous. I have other things in mind beyond my little kingdom. There's going to be opportunities. There's hope. You don't just save money if you don't believe those things. Right? There's a reason poor people are poor and rich people are rich. And a lot of it has to do with how we think. A lot of it has to do with how we think. It's everything. And so, house and riches are the inheritance of fathers. That's a big call, man. But I want to believe and live in such a way that I'm like, it's not because I have money or I have all these things. It's because I'm like him. I have storehouses because I believe there's needs coming that I don't see it, that I want to be ready for, and I'm prudent. Right? We even have Israel who did rely on God for manna in the desert. But eventually they had to go into the promised land. And eventually they had to start planting and raising their own crops. And man, was it all there ready for them? Everything was built, but they had to put their hand to it, right? Because of who they are. And understanding the season you're in is important too. Maybe you're in a manna season. Maybe you're in a, Lord, I need miraculous things to show up right now. But I want to grow and mature into the type of man who can manage his life, manage his finances, see way bigger picture. You know, God plans for hundreds of years. You know that the church used to think that way? That's why there's churches that are 1,500 years old. Our church ain't going to be around in 1,500 years.
The churches took 300 years to build.
Took 300 years to build. Talk about legacy. Talk about kingdom building. Talk about future, talk about provision, building for people who aren't even alive yet. That's how these people thought. This isn't a reflection on how much money's in your bank account. It's how are you thinking, and who do you think you are, and who do you think he is?
Tapping into wealth.
Continue.
Well, you talked about people that are living in miracles for finances, and there are those that are living with provision, and there's some that have riches, but not many have wealth, where it's an ongoing income from those apartment blocks they bought when they're in their 20s.
Right.
It's a resource. I mean, God is our source.
Sure.
But he gives us wisdom to invest and have a resource.
Well, that's exactly it. And this kind of goes into like taking things from being over spiritualized or under spiritualized. It's like, you know what? God gave Israelites the land. He gave them the know-how. He gave them all the stuff. Guess who had to still get their hands dirty and put seeds in that thing? Right? And it's like looking for opportunities, buying that apartment, thinking of things like that. And this isn't just financial, but that principle applies through all areas of life, where it's like, who am I? What kind of husband am I going to be? What kind of man am I going to be when my kid needs me and they're crumbling? When my wife has had enough, and so have I, but she hits the ground before I do. How am I going to react? What kind of person am I going to operate as? And that has to be bigger than the storm is irrelevant. Who you are going into it is what will determine everything.
Okay, we got like 3 minutes left. And then we're going to pause. And then we're going to pause. We're going to have coffee. And then we're going to be back here at 10:30. So, a lot to chew on, especially finances. One of the things I just want to, I think, balance out in this conversation, because I don't want us to get into a prosperity gospel kind of mentality, is one of the things Daniel's highlighting quite a bit is this idea of storing for something, not for nothing. And too often we've been taught that the promised land feels like what the Israelites were in the wilderness. To enter your promised land means you don't have to work the land, means that things are just, man is going to fall from heaven, that everything's going to happen. But that's not the example in Scripture. That's actually the desert. And too many Christians actually are believing for desert lifestyle with God in terms of wealth and finances, instead of understanding that only happens while you're a baby. Because the promised land is us back in the garden, not under the curse any longer of toilsome labor, but under the promise of stewarding and keeping and producing it.
And engaging battles with giants.
And engaging battles with the giants. And God even left people in the promised land for them to stay strong enough to fight, so that they didn't become weak and complacent again back into. So this idea that we store for our retirement, that's not biblical. The idea that we store for security, that's not biblical. The idea that if God's calling you to store is for a very dramatic purpose and it's for his kingdom, that's very biblical. Right? Because we don't want to be that guy in that's rebuked for building up all these. Look, I'm gonna rest. I had this great crop, so I'm gonna build up these extra barns, and I'm gonna just rest and just be merry for the next 4 years. There's a parable about that, and he's rebuked harshly. He's told right there and then, you fool, your life is taken tonight. And all that was for nothing. All that retirement that you were saving for, it's for nothing. It's gone, and you're dead today. You should have done something with that. You should have reproduced with that. We're not supposed to waste all this stuff. And so yeah, I love.
But when you give 2 pence, it's bigger than if you give 2 million.
Exactly.
So there's a huge connection between the tangible and the spiritual,
for sure.
And it's such a fine line to walk, as it's heart stuff.
And that's what I love about how you articulated this whole this whole wealth conversation, because these are always really uncomfortable for me.
Well, it wasn't even about wealth. It's
No.
about the principle of
Exactly.
who am I. But
Who am I?
It's easy to understand when it comes to
I think in the last 60 seconds I have here, I think the highlight is what's going on in your heart matters is more indicative to understanding what's going on than what you're actually doing, right? You know, Paul says, give out of the overflow of what you have, not what you don't have. You know, and to even when he says to store up, like we do Sundays, store up your wealth for one, you know, for the week's collection. He says right there, based on your income, like based on who you are, like there's a principle of what's going on in your heart as you do these things, not about what's going on in your bank account. So, all right, guys. Anybody watching online, we'll see you in half an hour. The rest of us, there's coffee and dainties. Feel free to bring them right back into here, and we'll be back at her in 30 minutes.
Wunderbar.